Today's domestic appliance, this week's everyday household object, going under Emily's scrutiny in a microscope, is the fridge freezer. Now, can you imagine living without it? No! So, how does it work? What's it doing, this fridge freezer, this very glamorous one here? We've got a normal one there, really.
That's the old one.
Yeah, the old one. So, what's it doing?
So, fridges work by vaporisation, which is essentially the same way in which we sweat. So when we sweat, we produce water on our skin. Now, a lot of people think, well, I'll just wipe it off with a towel because it looks a bit yucky. But actually, if we do that, we don't cool down as much because it's the act of evaporation that draws the heat away from our skin so that the water has to turn to vapour. So I can demonstrate this because a much quicker way of showing this on our skin is to use something like alcohol because it's got a lower boiling point than water, which is why when you make mulled wine, all the alcohol bubbles away and you don't actually get something very alcoholic at the end of it because it gets warm.
Yeah.
So if we put a bit of this on
So you're going to bathe me in vodka?
I am.
Does it have any effect when applied through skin? Yeah, marinate me in vodka. Oh, go on, marinate me in vodka. Take me memory of hypodermic syringes away.
So if I put it, this is 88%.
Hope you're watching this at home, dear. Order the vodka, I'll find the cake, right.
So if I dab it on your skin, because of the high alcohol content,
it's cold.
It will vaporise quite quickly. Exactly. What do you feel?
Cold.
It feels cold, just like you would if you were sweating, but it happens much quicker because the vaporisation process happens at a lower temperature than with water.
All of which was discovered when, because way back, I remember, you know, in garden history and stuff, they had ice houses and pits where, to keep things cold, they had to go and pick chunks of ice in winter, put them in a pit or a cave, and it would slowly melt, but through into early summer they could keep things cool. When did the first fridge come along? So
fridges came along in the sort of 20s or 30s, but because, as you say, before then we used to keep things, well, not we, they used to keep things in ice boxes, and before then even ice houses. But in the 20s and 30s the first electric fridge came along, but it was very expensive because they were hard to mass produce, so only the wealthy had them. The fridges that we know today came around in the 40s, and they're making use of something called a refrigerant or a cooling agent, which works by vaporisation in the same way as alcohol and sweat do.
Shall I have a look at the back? It's a very glam fridge here, which is covered in denim. I just hope you get white spilt milk off it. Here we go. Turning it round. So this is the gubbins end. So what have we got here then?
Right, so the coolant, refrigerant, gets fed in to the bottom black component down there, which is the compressor.
That's this bit here.
That's right. And it compresses the vaporised form of the coolant, just like when you're pumping air into a bicycle tyre and it gets really hot.
The pump gets hot, yes.
And the air gets hot, because it's got a lot of pressure. And then that high-pressure vapour squirts up these tubes, this is the condenser. And the condenser, as the name sounds like, condenses it and turns it back to its liquid form. Now, that releases a lot of heat, and that heat comes out the back, which is why the back of your fridge is hot, and that's why these black fans are designed to cool it down. Now, here's the important bit. It then shoots into the fridge itself in the vapour form, and as soon as it enters the evaporator in the inside of the fridge, it turns back into its vapour by the same process as we learnt here, and that vapour then absorbs a huge amount of energy very quickly from the inside of the fridge, just like your hand got cold when the alcohol evaporated from it, and that energy is pulled out of the fridge and the fridge gets really cold.
Right, so what we learned from that, ladies and gentlemen, is if you can't afford a fridge, buy a bottle of vodka. Now, there are various myths about fridges. I mean, one of them, I'm going to leave this door open now. One of them is that you shouldn't store eggs in a fridge. Well, why shouldn't you store eggs in a fridge?
Well, do you know what's interesting is that they've done a study on that recently, because people do say you shouldn't store eggs in the fridge, but they did a study on Lion-branded eggs, which is the ones that are proven to not have salmonella-free, exactly. And they found that for up to 2 weeks there was no difference at all with keeping your eggs out or keeping in the fridge. And so a lot of cooks say that you should actually keep them out anyway because it improves the flavour if they're at room temperature, and they bind better with food, with the other ingredients when you cook them.
Oh, right, so it's not quite such heresy.
Well, no, but if you're buying imported eggs, so if they're not Lion-branded, you should definitely keep them in the fridge because they may have salmonella and the fridge stops the bugs from multiplying.
Oh, right, that's a very good point. The other thing is, always keep a full fridge because it uses less energy than an empty one.
That's not actually true. People say it's more efficient if your fridge is full, but actually a full or empty fridge takes just the same amount of power to maintain its temperature. What does make a difference is that if the power went off in a power cut, or if your kids leave the door open, a full fridge will actually warm up more slowly, so it will retain that low temperature.
Because rather like the reverse of a storage heater, the cold stuff inside it will help keep it cooler by warming up slowly.
It's the actual substance that it's made of. That's why they suggest keeping bottles of water in there, because water has what's called a high specific heat capacity, which means it takes in a lot of energy.
I've always thought that.
Without getting warm. That's why when you go to the beach on holiday, even though it's really hot, the sand and the air around you gets really warm. When you put your toes in the sea, it's still pretty chilly, because the water, like the water in those bottles, absorbs a lot of energy before it actually gets hot.
Takes longer to heat up, so
Exactly.
it makes sense. Isn't that good? So, yeah, your foreign eggs, you can keep them in the fridge. And water, a good idea to keep in the fridge.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, as this, the stuff we use for the coolant just used to be CFCs back in the old days.
Because we've got this big hole in the ozone layer above the Antarctic.
Exactly. So we now use chemicals that are similar to CFCs but aren't actually CFCs, so they don't damage the ozone layer. And that's the stuff that's pumped into the back that vaporises. But interestingly, there was a headline recently to say that the hole over Antarctica, which is the main hole that everyone's worried about in the southern hemisphere, finally, the scientists are saying it's stopped growing.
So will it shrink?
They reckon in the next 10 years it will start to shrink, and that's largely because of the global action of banning things like CFCs and aerosols.
Good news. Now, I know this takes a while to cool things. There is a new thing out called the VTEX, which is very interesting. Now, this piece of kit here, if you inside it is a little canister here which takes bottles. Now, these 2 bottles of water I've put in here, my goodness me, you switch this on, it's electric, you put bottles of water in, and within 49 seconds, feel that.
Wow.
49 seconds, they are refrigerated. Special new bit of kit. Don't know when we're going to get it. This is a sort of prototype we've got here. Down it goes like that. 49 seconds, your bottle's in there. Mind you, it's quite large for your kitchen worktop, isn't it? Really? But it's an interesting piece of technology, and I guess it's going to be like mobile phones, though.
Exactly, because it's so quick compared to putting it in the fridge. It takes ages to get cold.
49 seconds. I won't ask you what's happening in here because you'd lose me. After the break, Emily has the answers to viewers' questions. Viewers like you, Helen Barnes from Peterborough. Helen, you're about to find out why vinegar and newspaper stops windows streaking when you wash them.